Good afternoon, citizens and community members of Everett. This is the Everett City Council's Built Environment Council Committee for the 9th of November, 2023. This is being held here in the Everett City Council chambers. We don't take public comment. The public is certainly welcome to attend in person or remotely, and of course to view these meetings online afterward. And also at every city council meeting, we take public comment. So if you don't have a chance to comment here but have something to say, we welcome that. And two major agenda items for this evening. Also, Councilmember Schwab is not here this evening. Councilmember Vogely is here with me, co-chairs of this committee. Two major agenda items this evening. The first one is a briefing on the Everett Housing Authority Park District Development Update. And Yorick, are you taking this one?
Yeah, I will collaborate. Thank you, Council Members Arlingo and Councilmember Vogely. York Stevens Wajda, Planning Director, and to my left here is Olivier Lando with the Everett Housing Authority and a key member of the project team that is bringing this proposed redevelopment of the former Baker Heights site into a mixed-use, mixed-income, civic amenity-rich neighborhood, a neighborhood asset here called the Park District. So we have given a couple briefings to the council and the committee, I think, over the past year. The design of the project has evolved a little bit, although it has stayed fairly stable, I think, for about the last year. So what you remember hearing about it before remains true. But of course, we've continued, well, not we, the Housing Authority project team has continued to add detail to it. And yesterday we kicked off what I would consider the beginning of the final phase of the consideration process with a briefing and a hearty discussion with the Planning Commission that went deep into the night. It was a great one for anyone who has the opportunity to review it. I encourage doing so. It was a very thorough presentation. We had the entire project team here. There's a good list of consultants and Everett Housing Authority staff and others. We had some public comment. We had some great question and answers with the Planning Commission. So I encourage folks to tune into that one for the full story. We're going to bring you a abbreviated version of it today. We want to give you an update on the process, where we go from here, a little bit of what's available in terms of content, and then we will be back to the council after the new year, although we're always available for more briefings, but anticipating after the new year for the more full series of presentations and then council consideration. Ultimately, this proposal will manifest itself in 4 ordinances. We have a comprehensive plan amendment. The comprehensive plan amendment is needed. There is one little table in the land use element that has a list of building intensities, and it has a limit of 10 floors for the multifamily designation. So for those land use designations on the comprehensive plan land use map, there are kind of assumed densities and heights for each one of the designations. And there's 10 floor written in there for multifamily, which is what the designation for the Park District site is. You may remember this from our specific amendments process. This was a request that the Housing Authority put into our process, otherwise known sometimes as the docket process. And that application was shunted over into this process to pair with the rest of the development application. So a comprehensive plan amendment to make one small change to that table to allow up to 15 stories with some conditions that make it pretty much applicable only to the Park District. I think over 5 acres with a planned development overlay, so very little chance that anything else would be able to take advantage of it. Once we have the comprehensive plan amendment in place, then the next ordinance would be a planned development overlay. Planned development overlay is equivalent to a rezone or a change of development regulations. It's a mechanism by which an innovative and master plan development can have essentially its own development regulations. It does need to be consistent with the comprehensive plan, so thus that first tweak to the comprehensive plan. The planned development overlay would then set the development regulations for this site and this site only. There are criteria for plan development overlays. There are criteria for comprehensive plan amendments in code. And once set, those would govern the subsequent development of the site. The third ordinance would be a development agreement. Development agreement is a contractual agreement between the city and a property owner. In this case, it would be Everett Housing Authority, that fixes the development standards and other provisions that will apply to and govern the development during a build-out period. Perhaps 20 years, I think, is a common one. I'm not sure exactly where we'll land on for the timeline here. The development agreement means that the city would not be able to change course. So the housing authority would have predictability during the build-out period that the planned development overlay regulations would maintain in effect. And then it also can address mitigations, fees, potential amendments process. There is a process for changing the development as conditions change. And in fact, later this evening, you'll be considering or hearing a quick briefing on that for the riverfront, which is very analogous to this process. So that's the development agreement is number 3. And then number 4 is street vacation and dedication. So part of the proposal is to realign the streets. And that will be done by vacating the right-of-way and dedicating new right-of-way in a different configuration with a net increase of right-of-way to the city. Those 4 ordinances, I will work backwards, I think, from where our schedule has this all wrapping up on March 6th, 2024. And on that date, we would have all 4 ordinances in one council meeting for your consideration. Before that, we would have a public hearing, a second reading, and a briefing that would be in January and February. Right now, we have penciled in January 24, January 31, and February 7, but there's nothing magical about those days. They can flex, and I think the same is true for the March 6th date. Working backwards from that, January 16th, the Planning Commission would hold a public hearing and give a formal recommendation on the plan development overlay and the comprehensive plan amendment. We will brief them and keep them up to speed on the contents of the development agreement and the street vacation dedication, but at least in the procedures in our city code and state law, that's not normally a Planning Commission recommendation. They will give a formal recommendation or required to on the plan development overlay and the comprehensive plan amendment. So Planning Commission would wrap up their process in January 16th. We have penciled in a potential visit to this committee on January 10th and are available for other briefings along the way. But potentially, this is your opportunity to get familiar with this process, and then we'll kind of go away with the Planning Commission and let that process play out, and then come back to you with a staff recommendation in hand and a Planning Commission recommendation in hand. Per our procedural regulations in City Code, staff recommendation needs to come after the final environmental impact statement is issued. Right now, the draft environmental impact statement is issued, and it is in a public comment period. Once that public comment period closes in November 27th, then staff and consultants will prepare the final environmental impact statement, most of which involves responding to comments that we heard during the draft environmental impact statements comment period. Things like, you didn't analyze this appropriately, you missed something here. So we'd respond to those comments, make amendments to the draft environmental impact statement as necessary, and then issue that final environmental impact statement soon after the new year. That is what unlocks the staff recommendation and the Planning Commission recommendation. We have had a long meeting with the Planning Commission yesterday, and we've had a couple with them already. They're pretty comfortable with the project in terms of their understanding of it at this point, and we'll probably have a pretty light touch on it in their December meeting, and then a bigger meeting and public hearing in January. So I think that kind of works backwards to today. Short version is we're in a DEIS comment period right now, and for anybody who's listening, I encourage you to take a look at that document. We're holding a public meeting at Baker View Community Center, which is directly adjacent to the site, on November 16th in the early evening. And the notice of where that meeting is available in the DEIS notice and on our planning department webpage is a great way to find it. There are boards up on the site, and we did all of the notification methods that were available to us to make sure that folks were aware of the DEIS and of the project itself. Any questions about process?
Yes, not really. Just for everybody, what's DEIS?
Yes, that you caught me. Draft environmental impact statement. I
So
tried
it's
so
just
hard
the
to-
draft,
Yes,
okay.
I try so hard not to use acronyms.
I know the EIS, that's,
Yep.
and just once again, Baker, where? November 16th for
Baker
the,
View Community
View.
Center.
thank you. Okay, wait. There are 4 ordinances, and just procedurally, one after the other, and by the 3rd one, then there's definitely going to be the 4th. But what if there's just some ruckus that happens and number 2 just doesn't go through? Then the rest of it is off the table.
Yeah, I think if we have them in that order in the agenda, each preceding one can kind of survive on its own without the following ones. But we would certainly take stock of that ruckus and find a different path forward at that point. It really needs all 4 of them to kind of work together, because if you haven't rearranged the streets, then the buildings are in the wrong place and things like that.
And that's the reason to have the public meeting, is so that if there's going to be a ruckus, you find those things as early as possible.
I don't foresee a ruckus. I just run with scissors.
Well, actually, there's a useful point that way. I mean, I think, and this was discussed a little bit in the earlier presentation to council, that we are talking about something here that is distinctly different, not only from what's typical in Everett and even in taller developments like the riverfront, but also very different than what was on that site before, the very low-slung kinds of things there. So I think that's kind of sometimes we get into the details, and our community members, when they're first becoming aware of this stuff, they're at a much more of an open, how can I say this? They're much less knowledgeable about it, and so I guess I would encourage in those kind of things from right out of the gate to explain that, well, this is why we're doing something that we're proposing that's quite a bit taller, to allow us to do some other things, because then there are some opinions out there about, what we've done in housing developments and low-income housing in the past, and some of these tall blocks have not worked out very well. So being ready with things like, why are we doing this time? What's different? How's it going to work better? Those are really helpful things, especially in terms of calibrating and focusing that feedback so we can do something with it. Because I think when we're in this stuff, we don't always understand that some of our community members are not acquainted with that at all.
Right. Well, the good thing is we have, I think, all the information that anyone could want and organized pretty well to be able to understand the project and its potential impacts. The draft environmental impact statement, the whole purpose of that is both to analyze alternatives. So there are 3 alternatives in it: a no action, the proposal, and a design alternative that would have, I believe, shorter buildings and less open space on the ground. So it's an opportunity to look at what if 3 different scenarios, and then also to go element by element of the environment, transportation, shadows, housing costs, and all of those, and have the best experts discuss what the potential impacts would be. So if you're wondering what would traffic be like, how many trips do we expect, and what streets do we expect them to use, that information is in the draft environmental impact statement. If you're wondering where will the shadows be at 6 p.m. on winter solstice, we literally have I should stop saying we. The project team has developed a shadow study. If you want to see what the visual impact is, there are pictures of a streetscape with the buildings rendered into it, so you can see from 12th and Poplar or something like that what it will look like. So that draft environmental impact statement is a pretty important step, and it provides some pretty important information for folks to dig into. And the purpose of that comment period is that if anything was missed or mischaracterized, we want to hear about it so that we can fix that.
Well, and the transportation part of that reminds me that I'm doing some, on other committee duties I have, looking at transportation and with respect to Everett Transit, for example. So is this connected with future planning with Everett Transit as well? Because we'll be obviously then aggregating more people and maybe so we don't need as much parking or as many cars or as many roads there. And I guess I assume that's part of that process.
Yeah, there's a design for bus stops on site. There's a bus that traverses Poplar, I think it is, and so they're working on a design for the bus stop and hoping for good service on it. There's a planning process with community transit for a bus rapid transit line down Broadway that would have a stop within a short walking distance on the site. We're in a transit master plan update process right now, separate from all of this, where Everett Transit is looking at their future network and service levels and all that. So definitely the whole team has looked at it very holistically.
Great, that's good to hear.
The two documents that I provided to you in a printout today, and all of these will be available. You know what is not there is the site plan, but I can lend you mine. The two documents that I have here are about half of the things I printed did not come out, so let me share that. This is the same as I think what was shared with the whole council a couple of months ago. The two documents are the heart of the plan development overlay. So we have Exhibit A1, which are modifications to what would otherwise apply to the site in the UR3 zone that it is in. One example that I will, two examples that are pretty key. One of them is height. So right now the height limit is 4 floors, I believe, on the site. And through the plan development overlay process, we would have a couple different height zones with the blue height area A would allow up to 15 floors, and then lower heights in other parts of the development. Another one are the uses. So there was a desire we heard from the neighborhood for some places to shop or get coffee or hang out, and so there's a list of uses that would otherwise not be allowed in the UR3 zone, non-residential uses. So this would supplement the normal zoning code, and then other things like that. I think those are two of the major ones, but there's some different setbacks and some things that kind of acknowledge that this is a master planned site, whereas the zoning code has to anticipate private development that you don't really know where it's going to be or who the neighbors are. But in this case, we know where it is and who the neighbors are and can design it particularly to that.
Yeah, so those are the kind of two really distinct departures from what's been typical, taller and offering more open space and recreational space and community space, and more commercial possibilities there for a more integrated community. And I assume those are the kind of things that move you away from the bad old days of tall blocks of affordable housing.
Yep.
Okay.
And along those lines, Exhibit A2 are design standards. So the two of them kind of work in concert, but the design standards are focused more on, it's not just aesthetics, I would say. It's how you work through the site. It's things like how the sidewalks relate to building edges and things. And so this also would replace, we have two chapters in our code, 1909 and 1912, I think, that provide design standards, and this would modify some of those. A lot of these are good ideas. Like I said, it's a pretty high-powered consultant community that's working on this, and planning staff and the planning commission are taking note of that, where there may be some best practices or good ideas for us to bring citywide, or at least to similarly situated locations. These are the two that I'd say really control the site. So this is the regulatory controls. There are a whole more than I wanted to print, but we will give you access to it electronically, and same for folks who are watching on the website. That site conditions, geotechnical report, parking analysis, visualizations, lots more. Ecosystems, there's a wetland next door, critical area report.
Yes, to the west, I know there's a significant wetland and some interest in providing some sort of access or path or something while you still preserve the function of the wetland. And I guess, not to get too deep, but for some of our community members who may wonder, well, if this goes along the trajectory, the time path we're talking about, when might there be groundbreaking, and when might we see people moving in?
I will turn to Olivier for that, if you know.
Well, I want to not commit to anything.
Yes, absolutely,
but,
absolutely.
In theory, we could have groundbreaking in, say, 24 months on our first phase, if everything goes really well.
All right. It helps because it's a
Yeah.
basic question, and sometimes people don't,
Yeah.
when there's a fundamental question they have, they don't listen real well to the other detail you're providing until the first question
Right.
gets in their head, gets answered.
And
Right.
the first phase is.
It's on the
farthest
far
from
corner right
these-
there,
these
yeah.
two buildings, I think.
Yeah,
Okay, and this is the existing rather taller building here, and then this is the stuff that's just been built, so to the southeast, okay.
correct.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I went to here.
Yeah.
It's already done, so what do you mean groundbreaking? We've got people living there, right? Are there people living there yet?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty much fully occupied.
Cool.
And so we're actually, this next, that corner next to you will be our phase 2, actually. That's what we're calling it, phase 2 now.
And so I suppose demolition of the existing structures there doesn't really start until we're ready for construction?
Yeah, we're trying to figure that out. We actually have a permit submitted already for the demo of the existing building, because it's sort of it's a separate process.
Yeah.
And we just have to get financing in
Okay.
order.
Part of the
to
reason
do
also,
it.
it's nice to inform our community members, because sometimes the times that people actually pay attention to things and go look for this kind of information is when they see a track hoe or something out there.
Yeah.
And that's what prompts people to ask questions. And
We had actually hoped to get the site demoed a little sooner, and then just maybe have it be more of a community-oriented space,
okay.
temporarily, but it's
Yeah.
taken a little longer to get it underway than we thought.
okay.
So these plan development overlay exhibits, and then the other couple that go along with this, there's exhibits up through A.6 and then B and C. C is the development plan, and that's one of the pages from it. There's the development agreement. We're in the very early stages of negotiating that. The development agreement will have some very important provisions, both on the financial side, on the phasing and timing side, the interim uses, so what can occur in between phases. What else was in there? Provisions for modification, again, analogous to the riverfront conversation that we're having right now. There was something else that we talked about yesterday evening that was a topic for the development agreement. It's escaping me right now.
Around midnight, when you remember, you can email it.
Parking. So there was there's been discussion of potentially, the planning commission is looking at the parking maxima or minimums, and, putting their, taking a close look at it. And the question came up, what if it wasn't, we built the first phase and it was clearly not enough. We've missed the mark on that. There's a lot of analysis that went into the numbers that are in there. We're toying with the idea of potentially having a look after the first phase. So after the first phase, look at actual parking activity, and if there's a problem there, then you can revisit future phases. So things like that.
Which would come up in the development agreement, which is exactly what you're talking about.
That's
Yeah.
right. That's right. So that's a little bit about process. We wanted to mainly alert you to where we're at in the process. I've given you the two key documents printed. how about I email or provide to Angie and Jennifer the full packet of information, which will also be available. There's a web page that the city is maintaining on the Park District that has all the draft environmental impact statement, copies of previous presentations, as well as public comments that we've received. We put those up on the web so everyone can see them. Great thorough comment from Ryan Weber. I believe he's still the president of the Delta Neighborhood Association. He's been tracking this project for a long time, and he gave some comments yesterday as well. And there's also some that are, someone who lives right next to these townhouses who wishes that there was worried about kind of privacy impacts of windows there. And there are responses that we have for that, but I encourage all of those comments, and we'll have those all available. So, yeah.
Does the webpage have a general introduction of the kind of different goals and structure of this, so people understand why we're heading in a different direction with this? Oh, great.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay, I'll have to look at that.
Yeah, it has like a little intro, what's next, the public comments are over there, the planning commission meetings, the public meeting is there, and then the whole DEIS, which has the cool graphics of the shadow study,
Yeah.
which are interesting. And I would just say like the December ones make you not,
Yeah.
you don't want to be in, like no one, let's not be in December. They're,
Everything is shade, no matter what.
yes, it's quite dark.
But some of the other, I think they're elevation diagrams, some of the things we've seen in the past, I hope they're accessible there because they give people a more concrete sense of what it is. Looking at the regulations and some of the numbers is a lot harder for people to integrate. So that kind of stuff improves the quality of the feedback we get and can avoid later thrashes where we get objections that weren't handled. I have it. I would say I see you scrolling at yes.
Yeah, December 22nd at 9 a.m., like, like it's not even the Park District, it's everybody it's just a dark day.
That's assuming the sun is out that day.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's true because those are days of heavier clouds and nothing much we can do about that. All right, well, I think that's
Okay.
excellent summary of this kind of thing, especially where it is complicated, multifaceted, and different than what we've done in the past, because I think that is a bigger obligation on us to communicate effectively that way, and it's partly because of the scale. All right, then our other item for tonight's agenda was comprehensive plan specific amendments and growth alternatives discussion. And I think this was the
Welcome to stay, but
3 alternatives discussions we've discussed before.
Thank you for being here and able to answer questions when they
Yes,
come
I
up.
appreciate it.
You bet. Let us know if you have any questions.
Okay, so this one, I don't know if, with this one is a item that has been bouncing along on this committee's agenda for several months now, I believe. So it's entirely possible that we have lost track of what questions there might have been. And but what I printed out for you is copies of the 3 alternative maps, and I can just give a brief overview of where we're at in the process. We are currently writing the draft environmental impact statement for the comprehensive plan periodic update. Much like the Park District and the 3 alternatives, we are studying these 3 alternatives across those same elements. I don't think we'll have a full detailed shadow study like that one, but we'll do our best to have as much detail and useful information in there as possible. So we're studying the 3 alternatives that we briefed you on a couple of months ago, summer time, I think. Current plans extended is essentially a simplification of our existing zoning and building height maps that break it instead of all of the different gradations of height limits. This is just single family, low rise, mid rise, and high rise, and employment areas. And then we have 2 growth alternatives, concentrated and dispersed. Concentrated is a lot more intense development focused on the arterials and downtown, kind of a doubling down on our existing strategy for growth. The dispersed alternative is where we're able to take a look at the middle housing concept. As you know, that is now required for the most part that we have a middle housing component in what is ultimately adopted, but having these two alternatives enables us to really tell that full story of what the potential implications of having middle housing throughout the city would be.
And I guess that a question that comes up with that then is, how much of the sort of the path from the concentrated to dispersed is mandated by the state regulations for middle housing?
So the state regulations are that every lot that allows residential the city must allow 4 dwelling units per lot, or 6 if 2 of them are reserved for affordable. We also have a growth target of about 29,000 housing units and capacity for 20,000. So we must satisfy those two. The middle housing bill does allow potentially up to a quarter of the city to be withheld from that and reserved, continued for single family, with some exceptions or some areas that are off limits for that. Some conditions would be the right word to say that. So we need to satisfy those two. And in other words, we have to do the middle housing thing. And then as far as the kind of concentrated aspects of it, taller buildings downtown, taller buildings on Evergreen Way, a little bit more width off of the arterials without this sharp drop
Right.
from 9 floors to 28 feet back to back. Just enough to get us to that 29,000 is the minimum requirement. It may be well in the city's interest to provide more development capacity for a number of reasons, but at least in terms of the minimum requirements is that we provide 29,000 units of capacity and do the middle housing thing.
And I'm not sure how many housing units are in Everett now. I've heard that number and I've forgotten it. You have a
Say
scale on it?
68,000?
I thought I remember 60-some thousand, that's about all I remember.
Okay, that sounds right.
I mean, in the way that kind of encapsulates the work we're doing on the comprehensive plan is how to reconcile these things and how to make those choices.
Yeah. So we'll have to come up with an estimate of what, if you did middle housing, what would just the middle housing realistically produce in 20 years? In other jurisdictions that have gone this route, I think Olympia, Spokane, and a couple other cities have already done the middle housing thing a little bit early, and it's not like a light switch from one day to the next. All of a sudden, there's plywood and lumber stacked all over the city. So we're not gonna, I think there are 20,000 single-family parcels in the city. What is a reasonable number of those that we could expect to develop with how many housing units? And then whatever is not captured in that, then that's what we're gonna need to provide in other forms of housing development in terms of
Because in recent
capacity.
years, certainly the number of those units in the city of Everett has been dominated by larger multifamily rental developments and townhouses.
Right, right.
Almost no condos and not a lot of single family.
Right, right. So we will, well, there's also the list of specific amendments, most of which are actually covered in the alternatives. We will continue working on the draft environmental impact statement. We have a consultant on board to look at the transportation impacts and help with the preparation of a transportation element of the comprehensive plan. We anticipate this, I mentioned that because the schedule that we're working with there has that portion wrapped up maybe around springtime. And so we would probably match the rest of the environmental impact work, environmental review work to that schedule and bring you a complete draft environmental impact statement sometime around spring or summer of next year. In the meantime, we continue to work through all of the different topics covered by the comprehensive plan with the Planning Commission. After 2+ hours of talking Park District at the Planning Commission last night, we talked about industrial land and economic development and the jobs and what to do with the industrial land base in the city. I think the couple of weeks before that, we talked about the land use element in more general terms and the residential and the zoning, and we've talked historical, we've talked climate, we've talked, we're just methodically going through every one of the elements to give them a background. Very little of it has been in the way of recommendations or what should we do to change. It's all been about, here's the legal requirements from the state and the regional policy framework. Here's what our current plan has to say, just to get folks thinking, get the planning commission and staff thinking through all of that. Probably between now and the summer, we'll want to do something similar with the council. Ultimately, what the comprehensive plan is going to need to have is this land use plan with capacity and all that for our growth targets. And then we have a vision, goals, policies, and actions that touch on land use, economic development, housing, transportation, climate change, historic preservation, urban design, and the marine port element. I think those are the elements.
So I'm looking, and of course, alternative 1 just is there as a space. And 2 and 3, they both contain capacity for 17,000 new housing units. And it's kind of based on the question, it just keeps coming up. We have to do middle housing, but it's not even on alternative 2. It's not listed as a thing. But the increased capacity for 17,000 new housing units is within both of them. So how does that work? How do we not put middle housing in both of the alternatives?
Yeah. Great question. 2 or maybe 3 reasons. One reason, we developed the alternatives before the middle housing bill was passed. And
Right.
so multiple months into this process, we were faced with the prospect of changing our entire alternative structure or continuing ahead. So that was one reason. The second reason is we need to have enough distance between the 2 alternatives to have something to report on. If both of them have middle housing, both of them have, more growth downtown and all that, then there's really nothing to distinguish the alternatives and discuss trade-offs between them. At the end of the day, we don't expect that the council will choose one of the alternatives. It will be components that mix and match of what seems to work well, and we can also look at things that are not on either one of these maps. In terms of where those housing units of capacity, and we're doing right now an exercise of looking in detail at the land capacity analysis. The 17,000 was estimated when we did these alternatives, so we're going to look essentially parcel by parcel. What is redevelopable? What's a reasonable assumption for redevelopment, and what would that redevelopment yield in terms of housing units across the whole city? But in general, you see, for instance, next to Evergreen Way, there's a darker brown for 2 blocks on either side of it. That's mid-rise. In alternative 2, concentrated. In alternative 3, dispersed. That is low-rise. So if you imagine that whole stretch and you've cut the buildings in half, that is roughly the housing units that would instead be in triplexes and townhouses and whatnot in the middle housing. So that's why it's roughly the same growth, but in different places. A little bit less intense on the arterials in dispersed, but a little bit more small-scale development throughout the city. The connectors are also in the dispersed alternative. Connectors are minor arterials that have played a role historically in the city in growth and are often connect to neighborhood business nodes and other things, and they're wider right-of-ways, usually with good transportation access to amenities and transit and bike lanes and sidewalks and all that. In the dispersed alternative, we'll be studying low-rise development along those, so that is a change. Right now, Madison and 19th are R2 single-family only. In dispersed, we would go even a step beyond middle housing to low-rise, which would be maybe 4 floors, where middle housing is like 2 floors, to be consistent with that neighborhood character.
And now that you answer, I remember asking that question before and you explaining it very well the first time.
Great, I hope I was consistent at least.
Yes, and I appreciate it.
And it's good to have these references. I think it also helps us when we talk to our community members that these aren't concrete plans. They give you an idea of the alternatives and help paint for them a vision of what kinds of things are being considered so we get good feedback.
One other just interesting way to thread, no, I can't make the metaphor, connect the first agenda item with the second agenda item. The Park District is in here, we have it, whatever color it is, it's just a holding place for whatever comes out of that Park District development. So it looks like mid-rise, which is not far from, I think, we're actually looking at what would be considered high-rise on a corner of the property. But what you can see is how that, in these alternatives, relates to the neighborhood around it. While it is on three sides surrounded by single-family zoning right now, in the future with these alternatives that we're studying, it would be part of a little bit more of a cluster of activity connecting to the colleges and a little bit to the hospital.
Ah, okay. Well, that's a good summary. These can go back up on my wall.
I don't know if you mentioned the story map, but there's a good interactive element on so it's everettwa.gov/
2044?
2044. So the story map lets you zoom in on each of the alternatives to, one's own property probably, or neighborhoods you're particularly interested in, and see how things are different with each of the proposals and see the specifics. So, and it, walks through some background as well, but yeah, that's a good thing to check out. It's a very cool tool. Staff did a lot of work to make that live, and it's a great feature for the public.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. I've used it frequently for my own research, because you can zoom into an individual parcel and see, you can even click on it and it'll say in alternative 1, you are this, and alternative 2, this parcel is this, and 3. It also has the whole narrative of the kind of approach that we're taking here. One of our staff will be going to the next Council of Neighborhoods meeting, I think, and demoing the story map to them. So we're trying to spread
good.
that. Yes, we're trying to spread that around as wide as possible. Thank you, Jennifer.
Did we get a kind of early glimpse at this?
Tried, but I think the thing wasn't plugged in right. Or
But
did we
now
have-
it's all,
No.
It's live now, yeah, you
Awesome.
definitely have heard about it. I don't know
Yeah.
if you actually saw the interface, or if you did, it was more static, so, yeah.
oh, I remember now. Becky
Yeah.
was here.
Yeah.
And I think, yep.
Oh, yeah,
Nice. I thought I saw something over there.
yeah. So potentially for the folks at home, they already are seeing a little bit of the preview of that, yeah.
Oh, yeah, just got it up right. It's up there right now. I'll have to go look at that myself and, get it out to our neighborhood groups, because they are often in the reference points in their neighborhoods for other community members, because it's still pretty much a tiny fraction of people who are in the neighborhood meetings.
Well, and the maps that you guys have, it looks like somebody took a marker and just wiped it up evergreen, and that's not exactly how it plays out when you look at the parcel detail, especially when you get down into really both of your districts, like, I guess that end of town, it's a little more straightforward, but yeah, so it's really useful to be able to zoom in and really see the detail.
Yeah, and of course, this scale is probably the kind of thing, I know that transportation planning is going on right now. I've been working with Everett Transit on that, and that's why I ask questions about coordination on this kind of stuff, because it affects all these things. Plus, of course, the schools, the larger developments will affect them directly.
And then, as always, we want to hear input from the public and from the council as well. So on that everettwa.gov/2044, you will see plentiful methods to contact us. There's a comment form, their email addresses. Please let us know what you think about the alternatives. It can be responsive. It can be just what you would like to see out of your city. Any kind of comments are welcome, and we will compile those and make them all available to the Planning Commission and the council.
And as mentioned earlier on, if anybody in the audience for this or a recording has comments on this, you can always come to the city council meetings as well. A public comment opportunity to everyone. Well, I think that covers that pretty well. I guess the last thing on our agenda is to consider some next meeting agenda topics for that. I remember most of these in terms of things were being considered. I don't know if, from the standpoint of administration, planning, resources, there are any of these that are likely next to tee up for you.
Yeah, I don't really have any in mind, like, right at this moment. I will definitely circle back with Yorick and the rest of the planning staff if there are any comprehensive plan elements that are kind of ready to talk about, because that's, I think, always a good use of your time.
And I know from
We
the
had
standpoint of what I've heard from some neighbors, the Everett Mall Way traffic calming is something people are paying attention to, and having stood there for a while on the weekend, I know that's a very high traffic corridor and also a commerce corridor, but also one where the commerce is limited a little bit by just feelings of safety and access. And then as a separate thing, of course, we've been looking at some permitting processes and resources that way, because that's one of the things that can make it difficult. A bunch of the flexible housing, especially things like ADUs or repurposing things, that's turned out to be complicated. One of the reasons I think a lot less of it has happened in the real world than we expect or than we hope is that it can be very cumbersome, in particular the change of use. You know, you're not building from the ground up, and Jennifer and I have been working on that, and so hope to have some more suggestions there.
Yeah, we had talked about kind of I don't know what name it should have, but just sort of a briefing on permit processes in general and just our workflow and all of that. So maybe we'll see if folks are available for that. I think that could be really useful, just as.
And I think there were going to
Yeah.
be there's some additional budget dollars in the planned budget to increase
There are.
that staffing.
Yeah, there's some adjustments to allow, like, sort of shift some folks and then change some supervision a little bit so that folks are not just like pounding away every day, but there's some training and supervision opportunities. But it's your department.
Partially shared with
Yeah.
Public Works. And,
Yes.
but yeah, way to knit threads through.
Well, that is something, I guess, maybe it's probably inside baseball here, so maybe a separate discussion, not necessarily to bore the public with, but that interaction of the departments is something that I don't understand as well as I'd like to, and especially in terms of trying to help improve things. And I think some people involved in it in terms of the private parties, business owners, especially the people repurposing buildings, because we've got a lot of existing stock, and so in a lot of cases, things will be modified use, and that's something I think we can, on both sides, can do better.
And there's a bill that came out of last year's legislature focused on the permit process, timelines, data reporting, and a strong encouragement to go digital, which we are and are pretty much wrapping up right now. That could be a good context for a briefing to what our approach is to meeting the requirements of that bill.
Yeah, okay, good. I'll put that down here. I think that's.
Noted. We'll
Okay.
see, we'll try to make some version of that happen.
Yes, I
Yeah.
mean, we might even do a couple of layers of that, just have a kind of a 2 or 3 person discussion, just so that if we see if it's good to bring to this group and then to the council as a whole. In part, I think I would like to have something to the council as a whole, because we get feedback from our community members who are trying to do some of these things. And it isn't just something the city needs to change. This is something I think where we can do things to help those who want to do it have a much smoother process. Repurposing things, changing use is more complicated than I think a lot of people understand. Councilmember Vogely?
Yeah, there are many thoughts, but I don't think they necessarily are required at this time.
I think that's it then. We'll turn a few minutes back to you, getting ready for the next meeting. And thanks to all who attended virtually or watched this on a recording. I'll emphasize again, this is your city. Come and comment, write, email, let us know what you think. All right, we're adjourned.